Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And as John has just found out, I talk a lot. So I'm going to try to keep this introduction short. First of all, I want to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programs. And I would also like to thank John for letting us share this program with other libraries. I think we had about 15 or 16. I will put the names of the libraries in the chat because I think that when libraries work together, we make magic. And tonight we're going to make romance magic. I'm very excited. So I have just right into it. John, I have known about you for many years. I'm friends with Evelyn Richardson, a romance writer who works at a library I used to work at. And she just raved about you. I know you're a book list reviewer. You work part-time at the Poisoned Pen. You were a librarian. You're just amazing. Like the work that you do for the romance community is so amazing. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with people who share my love for romance fiction and the romance genre. Working in a mystery store sometimes can be challenging, but we're trying. We're getting more romance readers in at the Poison Pen. I'm also thrilled to share with you some of my favorite holiday romances that I discovered this year. So do we just launch into that?
Oh, no, not yet.
Okay.
For those people coming in, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A. I will be moderating them to John. But first of all, John, I want to know, how did this happen for you? Have you always been a romance reader?
No, my personal journey as a reader was more towards the mystery side. And then back in the 80s, which shows how ancient I am, I discovered Regency romances with Marion Chesney and some of the early Loretta Chase, who wrote for Walker back then. And that led to romantic suspense and authors like Jane Ann Krenz and Nora Roberts. And then I was pretty much fully into the genre.
Mm-hmm. Did that surprise you?
A little bit, because you kind of, if you don't read romance, you sometimes have these preconceived notions of what the genre is. Just like if you don't read fantasy or you don't read mystery, you're not necessarily sure you would like it. But I think once you discover a particular genre and find it's for you, that's when the real reading magic happens.
Mm-hmm. And was it a huge leap for you to go from reader to reviewer? Did you have to be a librarian to do that? Like, what is the mechanics of that?
Oh, for reviewing, yeah, right now I believe, well, for Booklist, I think most of the reviewers are either have been librarians, are working librarians, have some connection to the field. They do have a few, I guess you'd call them professional reviewers, that they bring in for occasional books if they're need them. There actually, you can go to Booklist, and I do some reviewing for Library Journal, the websites, and they give you the criteria for how to apply to be a reviewer. And basically, you have to tell them what your reading preferences are, if you have particular interests or skill sets, like cooking or gardening for Library Journal, or you have a background in art history or things like that. And they try to match reviewers up with the right book that way.
Wow. Okay. I just put in the chat for everybody who's here to put in the chat what holiday romances you're reading, and we'll crowdsource some of our fun ones. That's really interesting. So do they give you books to review, or do you choose your books?
Oh no, it's assigned for the most part, though you can request a particular book if you've developed a relationship with your editor. But I think the key is both at Booklist, especially because that's where I review romance, they want to give, and Booklist is designed primarily for libraries and for bookstores in some cases. They want to give their readership a wide range of choices when it comes to the genre. So they want to be sure in romance, they're reviewing inspirational fiction, inspirational romances, historical romances, paranormal romances, romantic suspense. All of those things need to be kind of reflected within the pages of that review journal. So they try to find, I know of one reviewer who really, her focus is inspirational romance. That's what she loves and that's what she reads. So they kind of try to steer a lot of things towards that review.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, let's start our reviews, our recommendations, and then we'll talk more about reviewing maybe a little bit later. So,
Sure.
what is first on the list for your holiday romance recommendations, John?
First on the list is an author who's probably familiar to a lot of you. It's called The 12 Months of Christmas by Sheila Roberts. Sheila has done holiday themed women's fiction romances for at least 4 years. So she's kind of got the skill set down. And in this particular book, which is her latest, it came out a few months ago, the premise is, don't you wish that sometimes you could have a holiday do-over? And in this particular case, there's three protagonists. Sunny, Ariana, and Molly certainly would like to do that. Sunny is a newlywed. She's got two step kids who want nothing to do with her during the holidays. Ariana is newly divorced, and her child is spending the holidays with her ex-husband, which makes her kind of sad. And Molly, ordinarily, she loves her job at the post office, but the post office during the holiday seasons would turn anyone into a Grinch.
Mm-hmm.
Three women, they all kind of meet, become friends, and decide that they're going to redo Christmas once each month until they get it right. So it's a whole year of holidays. It's the story about these three different women. What I love about Sheila Roberts is she writes relatable characters. I mean, they're not all sunshine and light. There's a little bit of life's darker moments. Things take a turn, health wise for one of the characters, but that's realistic, and we all have to deal with that during the holidays. And especially, she has these little moments. This case, there's a woman who absolutely is the worst to Molly at the post office, a customer. She's coming in every day complaining about why isn't the cookie she sends to her son being delivered. Molly's trying to show her the tracking record that says it is being delivered. We have proof here. It shows it was. The woman insists it isn't. She's just giving Molly hell. And eventually, Molly realizes what's happening with this woman, and it turns their whole relationship around. And you see um, why this woman was so concerned about her son getting the cookies. It's just a little moment, but it's a wonderful book. It's heartwarming. It's got a few moments of tears, but that's okay. It's the holidays. You can cry. Um, it's by Sheila Roberts. It's the 12 Months of Christmas.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I just have one, which is why why is a holiday romance something that we look for nowadays? I mean, you said there's tears in it. It's not just like this happy-go-lucky end of year
Yeah,
thing. So, like, why are we reading them?
well, I think for many readers, they want to, if you're a romance reader, you love romances to begin with, but the holidays create almost another level of opportunities for matching protagonists together. There's holiday office parties. There's one book I read where that happens. There's coming home for Christmas, and we've got a couple of books there where people meet someone from their past. The holiday season is supposed to generate within us those feelings of goodwill and tidings of joy and everything else. So you've got the setting and kind of the flavor, and that kind of adds to the romance.
Is there any, well, I guess I'm gonna lie and say I do have more questions. Um, I liked what you had to say about this book in terms of like how they how it's a full year of holidays and things like that. But a lot of people find holidays to be very stressful. So why again would we pick up a holiday romance book knowing that for us of Thanksgiving is incredibly stressful just because it can't, flying is terrible.
Well, we've got one of those books that covers that too, but flying in general. But I think maybe it's because even in real life, if we can't have the perfect holiday, we can have that within the pages of the book. So it's kind of wish fulfillment, or um, trying to capture what we may not experience in real life, but in our reading life.
Mhm. And we were talking about this before we got started about covers. So
Mhm.
that cover would not give me any sense of the fact that it talks about all of the holidays through the year. Is it in the blurb?
Yeah, it does talk about it in the cover jacket copy. I think in the case of the 12 Months of Christmas, they're trying to give a little bit of mystery to the story because they want to draw you into it. Why are these women wanting to as you're right. I mean, isn't one Christmas once a year enough for some people?
Mhm.
Why would you want to go through it? Well, you get to see how they take that chance to learn about themselves through the process of celebrating the holidays and learn a
Mhm.
little bit about their neighbors and their friends.
Okay. It sounds lovely. I will definitely
Yes.
be looking
Yeah.
that up. Okay, so what's our next one?
Next one is a print debut for a digital author. It's called Snowed In for Christmas by Jacqueline Snow, surprisingly enough. Um, it's the story of Becca Fairfield, and she works as, you call her, a sorority house mom on a campus in a small um, kind of suburban part of Illinois. She's looking forward to this Christmas because all of the girls in her house are going home, which means Becca can take the holiday off. She doesn't have to stay there with anyone and celebrate it with her own family. And of course, in the best laid plans often go awry. There's a snowstorm. It damages part of the roof in the sorority house. Becca now has to stay there while the repairs are being facilitated and someone comes out. But that's okay. She has plenty to read. She's got hot cocoa, whiskey for toddies. She's set up for the holiday. She's going to make the best of it. And then, of course, something else happens, and that's the power goes out in her neighborhood. Well, she can't stay in the house by itself. It's going to be freezing. Her only alternative is the next door neighbor, who happens to be the football coach for the college. Harrison Cooper has offered to let Becca stay with him. They can become what he calls blizzard buddies because he has a generator, his house will be warm, everything like that. And it seems like that would be the perfect solution, except for the fact that everyone on campus calls Harrison Hot Harrison, which is going to set up the sexual chemistry dynamics in the story. And Harrison is the same guy who a couple months ago Becca dated, gave her the best kiss of her life, and then ghosted her. So that's the premise of Snowed In for Christmas. It's got that forced proximity trope going. It's got the kind of enemies to lovers again, I guess you'd call them, storyline. It's got some nice moments of humor. She writes with a lot of sharp banter between the two characters, but also if you need something to keep you warm during the cold winter season, there's a lot of sexual steamy heat in the book too. So it's got all those things going for it.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So again, questions, if you have any, put them in the Q&A, not just about this particular book, but anything about holiday romances. Again, we were talking about this a little bit ago, was the steam level in these books. Do you find that people want more steam in a holiday romance, or do they want it to be just like this gentle, happy, not tensiony type of situation?
I think that's a good question. I think if you like steam in your romances to begin with, you want steam in your holiday romances.
Mhm.
If you're someone who prefers sweeter romances, that's not what you're hoping to find in your holiday love stories. I think the holiday thing doesn't necessarily impact the
Mm,
convenience factor. I think that's universal throughout your romance reading experience.
that makes sense. So I want to go back to what you said about the tropes, because I think I told you earlier that my romance book club read holiday romances for our book club meeting this last week, and we hit every trope. You know, too cold, snows in, single bed, no heat. It was just like on and on and on. Every single trope you could possibly imagine. And I guess I wonder, like, do you think that the holiday romances lend themselves better to those kind of tropes, or like what you just said, is it's just another book, it just happens to have a holiday in it?
Well, I think some probably definitely would be like the snowed in would be hard to do in July, I guess, unless you're in Australia or someplace like that. But yeah,
With
some
July, you can have like the no air conditioning, everybody has to take their
yes.
clothes off, right? So there's pros and cons.
Yeah, it's definitely I do think there's a few that might be universal, but some that are specific to a certain holiday. And I think how the author incorporates them into the storyline is what makes their book either work for the romance reader or not.
Mhm. I wrote in the chat that I read The Holiday with the Wongs in by Jackie Lau, and it had all of the tropes and and it was super sexy and all of that, but it was also, it was for holidays. So, it felt like characters and that particular author felt like holidays were a good time for people to get together, particularly. And so, is that something that you find in the books that you're reading and reviewing?
Several of the holiday romances this year do have that. Um, the characters would not be back together again unless it was the holidays,
Hmm.
because that's what brings them either back home and they meet someone that they had known before, or they happen to be at the same place during the holidays and that fosters a relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, that was definitely one of the books, is that family, they were all coming back. And
Hmm.
if anybody gets a chance to read it, it was very funny. Um, but I was struck by that each holiday had a specific time because the family was all together.
Uh,
Or so, all right, on to the next one, John.
let's do one that actually does several holidays, and it was actually one of my favorite books this year. I've never read either of the authors, but it makes me want to read more by them. It's called Three Holidays and a Wedding. I I'm sorry if I mispronounce the author's names. I'll give it my best shot. Uzma, yeah, Ladudin and
So
Marissa.
that's Uzma Jalaluddin.
Thank you, and Marissa Stapley.
Mhm.
Um, the book is a lot of fun. It starts out with the two main characters, Miriam Aziz and Anna Gibson, and they're complete strangers. They're both at the airport in Denver. They're both flying to Toronto. Marianne's family is going there to celebrate her younger sister's wedding. It's going to take place during the holiday. Anna is going there to meet her fiance's family. And they get on the plane. They happen to be seated next to each other, complete strangers. The plane in flight experiences some severe turbulence, the kind that makes people clutch their armrests and think about who they might have to contact as their next of kin. And that encourages Marianne and Anna to kind of share confidences with each other, things that you would not share with a complete stranger. And they think, okay, the flight, that's just for the flight. What happens on the plane stays on the plane, is not going to affect them after that. But the same turbulence is part of this huge kind of snowstorm called snowpocalypse or something like that, which happens frequently, I guess, on the East Coast, that diverts their plane and sends everyone there to a small town in Canada called Snow Falls. And they're going to be stranded there for the week, which means Marianne and Anna have to get to know each other a little bit better. They realize that they share some common concerns. They both have romantic issues that they have to resolve. And while this is going on, the book also looks at the three holidays in the title, which are Christmas, Hanukkah, and Ramadan. Because every once in a while, I think the last time this happened was 2000, those three holidays all take place during the same week. And
Mhm.
just so that was the premise of the story. It's really interesting because both characters, Miriam is someone who's always been responsible for her family. She's been the one that navigates the world for them, gets them places, gets things done. She's tired of being in charge. She's never had a chance to really find her own happily ever after. And Anna feels like she's kind of settling for a happily ever after with her fiance, because he seems like the perfect guy, but she makes her feel herself feel second class, I guess, or maybe not good enough, not worthy of the relationship. So they both resolve those issues. It's a romance, so you get the happily ever after, but she also gets this small town that's kind of the perfect snowy little setting, and you learn a lot about three different holidays in the
Mhm.
process.
Yes, one of our romance book club members read that book for our meeting last week and loved it.
Mm.
Uh, I read Uzma's first book, Aisha at Last, which is sort of like a Jane Austen takeoff.
Mhm.
Also love that. Love the writing. I haven't read the other author, but which brings us to actually the question about diversity, not just in in holiday romances and reviewing.
Mhm.
So have you noticed that there's a trend in having more holiday romances of a variety of holidays more available nowadays?
You would think. I know that most professional review journals like Booklist and Library Journal do their very best to make sure that if a holiday romance is pulling from a different holiday than just Christmas, we definitely try to give it its place in the roster. I think the problem is publishing hasn't caught up with that expectation. I mean, I've seen a few, like there's an author who does Jewish holiday romances, and I can't think of her name now, but it will come to me 3 minutes later after the program's over. She's done a couple that were relatively successful, and but you don't see, maybe it's because publishers, well, I think it's the chicken and the egg thing. Publishers say there's not enough demand for it, but if you don't provide the book so people can find it, how do you justify the demand? But definitely it's important that you have this range of choices for readers. And if there's books out there, I know at Booklist try their very best to get them reviewed.
Mhm. So it actually brings up my question that I was going to ask earlier about diversity, is that and reviewing, because reviewers only review books that are published by traditional, for the most part, traditional publishers, which leaves out this huge swath of writers who are publishing, self-publishing, or on, yeah, I'm just going to call it self-publishing, or with very small presses or things like that.
Publishing, yeah.
So how do you shine a light on those diverse, any author that's self-publishing when they're not offered to you for review?
That is the challenge. And I have to say right up front that it's one of the focuses of Booklist is that we're providing reviews for libraries so they can purchase things for their collection. So if a library can't get the book through standard channels like Ingram or Baker and Taylor, or through a publisher like Random House, it's difficult to justify this using the space for review for something a library can't get. And that's just the hard reality of it. We wish it would change, but there are some authors who now are available through Ingram, which opens up the door to that. Booklist really tries to get smaller presses, if they can be accessible to libraries, into the review circle. One of the authors that I just adored that has gone to small presses is Carla Kelly. She was a stay, and yes, for Signet Traditional Regencies, she's now writing for Camel Press, I believe, and we have reviewed several of her books because you can get the books. So I guess that falls down to the question of, can libraries get the books? If they can, then we do our best to review them.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it does take out a lot of indie published authors, and that's just the sad fact of it, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, uh, I guess the question is, where can we find reviews for indie published authors that are reliable and not crap? Sorry, I'm recording this. I probably shouldn't have said that.
You can always edit it out. I understand what you're saying because there's so many web based sources for reviewing, but sometimes when you read the reviews, I think the key when you're reading a book as a reviewer is not whether you like it, but whether you think other readers are going to like it. You may not like paranormal romances, but there's lots of well-written paranormal romances out there. If you can't read it and review it and say, this is what readers of shapeshifter romances would like, or this is what vampire romances lovers would like, then you shouldn't be reviewing it. You have to take yourself out of the picture and look at the book in terms of its quality, its content, and its appeal to readers at large.
Mhm. That's tough because you have to take yourself out of your own head.
Yeah. For me, the challenge is I'm not a big fan of steamy romances myself as a reader. That's not my comfort zone. But one of the romances that we're going to talk about is incredibly steamy and well written, and it deserves a place in every library, every bookstore.
Mhm. That's good to hear because I like this theme. Um, Rachel says that Jean Meltzer has written Jewish holiday romances.
That's the author I was thinking of. Thank you. That would have driven me crazy.
Perfect. So yeah, crowdsourcing information is always welcome. Okay, so let's continue on. I'm sure I'll have more questions as we go.
Okay.
Actually, John, how many books do you have to review? So I want to make sure we get through all of the books.
Well, I can do as many as you like. I can do them as quickly as you like. I've got about a dozen. So
Okay, all right. I'll stop asking so many questions.
no, the questions are great because I learned stuff too, which is important. And I'll do the next one, which is a perfect example of a really super steamy romance that is so well written that even I fell in love with it. It's called A Holly Jolly Ever After by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone.
Yes. I love them both.
They're wonderful writers. The book's protagonist, Winnie Baker, has built her acting career around a brand of being a wholesome, sweet heroine for conservative, almost Christian film productions. But that all implodes when a sex tape surfaces with Winnie in it, and her acting career is over, or so she thinks. What she decides to do is she's going to rebrand herself, and she's taken an offer to star in a steamy, almost a Hallmark Gone Dark movie about Santa. And her co star is the former boy band singer and now current owner of a pizza chain called Slice Slice Baby, Caleb Lieberman. And so that sets up the story. And the first hurdle that Winnie has to overcome is she knows how to act, but she doesn't know how to sell sex on the screen. But
Mm.
fortunately, Caleb, who has a lot of experience in that particular area, is more than willing to give her some private lessons. So that's the story of, yeah, of Holly Jolly Ever After. It is so funny. They both write with such a sense of wit. Yes, I mean, you probably would blush if you were reading it out loud in a group of people. It's that sensually detailed, but that's how these authors write. So you either go with it or you don't. It's for me, it was the perfect combination of sweet and sexy because there's some real moments of sweetness in there. There's also some incredibly detailed love scenes. And if you need anything more to add to your willingness to read this book or add it to your library's collection, both Julie and Sierra formerly worked in public libraries. So they come from a library background. So yeah, it was one of my favorite books. And it's one of those things about try something different. You never know when you like it.
Mhm. Yeah, did you find that, I'm just gonna ask one question, that there was any kind of disconnect at any point because there were two people writing this book?
No, because I think both of them took a different protagonist. So you saw
Um,
from Wing's point of view and from Caleb's point of view. So it was almost like being um, exposed to two different characters, and they would sound different because they're different people.
mhm. That's an unusual or different way for a duo to write a book, which I think is great.
Yeah.
Um, Kamachi asks, are there any works of by authors of South Asian origin in your holiday romance list?
Not the ones that I brought today. I think there's some in the Booklist Holiday Romance Roundup. You could check their website and see other reviewers did contribute to that. So I'm not like the exclusive reviewer for that, but not that I remember.
I do
Um,
want to tell Kamachi that she should read the Diwali book by Sonia Lally. It's adorable. You'll really enjoy it if you want something like that. Um, have you read Sonia Lally, John?
I don't think so, but now I'm going to have to. There's so
Yes,
many books out there. It's just like, how do you keep up with it?
exactly. You can't hit everything. But yeah, she's really good. So let's move on.
Okay, the next book is an example of a sweeter romance. So if you're looking for something in that particular area, this would be a perfect choice for you or your readers. It's called The Holiday Mix-Up by Jenny Baird.
Mhm.
The protagonist is a waitress, Katie Smith. She's had a longtime crush on one of her cafe's customers, Juan Martinez. Now, nothing's happened when Christmas rolls around, and all of a sudden, Juan expresses an interest in Katie. But it turns out he just wants Katie to be his pretend girlfriend for the holidays because his parents are constantly playing matchmaker with him. He's tired of it. If he brings someone home, that he hopes that will finally stop the matchmaking for that. Katie is thrilled. She has no plans for the holiday. She loves Juan. It seems like the perfect Christmas for her until shortly after Juan informs his parents he's bringing her home for the holidays. Juan is in an automobile accident, ends up in a coma in the hospital. So Katie's going to visit him in the hospital. She knows she should tell his parents that the whole thing is a setup. There's nothing real to it, but she just can't. They're so nice and so loving, and they just welcome her into their family. That's what she's wanted for the holidays. She doesn't find herself telling them the truth. And that sets up the premise where Juan's brother, Mateo, is brought into the picture, and he's had his suspicions about their relationship, and he's determined to prove them wrong. It's a wonderful book in many ways. First of all, it reminds you of a popular movie while you're sleeping. Yes, it should, because that's kind of the premise. But it's got this wonderful setting in California, the Napa Wine Valley area. That's where the Martinez winery is set. So you get little bits and pieces about that. It also has some interesting details about how Puerto Ricans celebrate the holidays, because the Martinez family is Puerto Rican. So they bring in their culture, their foods. So you learn about that as you're learning the story. So it's really, if you love the Hallmark Channel and their movies, this is the book for you. It's The Holiday Mix-Up by Jenny Beard.
Sounds awesome. I love sleeping, the
While you're sleeping.
while you're sleeping. I was going to say sleeping in Seattle, but I know that's wrong. Also an awesome movie. So I do have a question about this again, going back into diversity a little bit, is do you think that people, there's so much, contention right now about people who are other or different or anything like that. Do you think that people are a little bit more forgiving if it's a holiday romance versus a different type of romance where people are multicultural?
You would think that the season of goodwill towards all men would be part of our romance reading. I'm not sure. I think romance readers in general are much more open to reading other cultures, reading other lifestyles, other kinds of things. I mean, you don't always see that in other genres to the extent that you do in romance. The whole explosion in now I've lost my train of thought. Male romances, all that is part of our romance readers' acceptance of other people's lifestyles.
Mhm. And we had talked a little bit about monster romance before we all started, and that completely takes, that element away from the conversation but it also brings up other aspects of humanity that is just fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. That's
Although
true.
figure out where aliens are celebrating holidays, but it's still fun.
That is.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
More?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay, I'll do two kind of together because they kind of are emblematic or typical of this whole idea of Christmas is great, but if you can add dogs to the picture, it's even better.
Mhm.
So these are both kind of canine Christmas romances. The first one is The 12 Dogs of Christmas by Susan Wiggs. She's a popular author. Many of you know her. In this particular book, the last Christmas was the worst one ever for the heroine, Brenda Malloy. It started with Brenda and her husband and their dog, Tim, going to the veterinarians. It ends well for Tim, the dog. Don't worry about that. But it doesn't end so well for the husband because the veterinarian finds what was causing Tim his digestive issues when he pulls partial piece of a woman's lacy undie from Tim out of Tim. And the undie did not belong to Brenda. So that was the first sign that things were not going well for their relationship. It's a year later. Brenda has divorced Tim, started a new life for herself. She's a children's book writer. She has a new look. She volunteers at a local dog shelter in Houston. Everything's looking great. She's looking forward to the holidays when her friend and fellow volunteer Dolly implores her to help. They have a delivery of 12 dogs that have to go from the shelter in Houston to their new owners and homes in New York, a small town in upstate New York. Dolly doesn't have anyone to go with her on the drive. Brenda has to do it because it's dogs and it's Christmas. What can you say? Of course, once Brenda arrives in the town, she ends up falling for a paramedic and his son, who are one of the new owners that are adopting a dog. So it's got all the warm, fuzzy feelings that you want, a small Christmassy town, great characters. It's Susan Wiggs. What more could you want?
Now,
The
was
other
that on the steamier side or on the sweeter side? Because I know
side, you
sweeter,
could
right?
definitely give this to your maiden aunts, and no one would have any problem reading this.
Oh, John, my maiden aunts gave me my first romances. So it depends on who your maiden aunt is.
No, it's definitely on the Hallmark, a sweet side of romances.
Got it.
And other dog holiday romances, Christmas at Corgi Cove by Annie England
Mhm.
Noblin. She's done a few other dog holiday combinations. This is her latest. The protagonist is Rosie Reynolds, who is living in a small town with her aunt Bonnie and her uncle Clyde. She loves them because they basically raised her as their own daughter for the last 15 years. But there's a problem. The small bed and breakfast where they live and work and support themselves is struggling, primarily because a new hotel, a big grand hotel, is being built across the cove, across Corgi Cove, and that's pulling people away from the bed and breakfast. And in addition to that, the company that owns the hotel wants to buy out the bed and breakfast and basically tear it down.
Mm.
So Rosie had these two problems going for her, but she's got a solution. There's a competition for the best bed and breakfast themed holiday Christmas inn in the USA. She's going to enter the inn, win the prize money, save the bed and breakfast. Everything will be back to normal, except the hotel has sent sexy Everett St. Clair to town to bargain her aunt and uncle down and make them sign the papers that sell the bed and breakfast to them. So I mean, when you stop and think about it, really a small town, a hotel across the lake, you can't bring reality into it, but you just enjoy it for the warm, fuzzy feelings it gives you and
Mm.
the dogs.
And the dogs, yes. So I think we've gotten through about 3/4 or whatever of your books.
Mhm.
I want to ask about the fact that most of them are Christmas books, even though they have cultural differences and things like that. Is that because that's where you lean towards, that's what you're given, or is that because that's what we all find more of out there?
Yes, to all three, pretty much.
Mm.
I think part of it is publishers are hesitant to do anything new or different. They want something that's tried and true, something that has a track record. They want other publishers to test the waters out with different holidays or different things. Then if it's a success, you'll see a lot more of them. So that's why you don't see more Hanukkah mysteries or more Ramadan mysteries or more Diwali mysteries. It's all there. Everyone's waiting for somebody else to make the first move and be a success. Um, as far as reviewing goes, I know the editor at Booklist that does the romance genre actively tries to bring in as many different holiday romances as she can, but it is limited by what publishers submit. So that's the caveat.
Oh, so it's by publisher submission. If you knew a publisher was publish or putting out a book, could you ask for it if they don't submit it?
You can, but we also have to take that caveat that it has to be available for libraries to order. But definitely, I mean, if a particular book looks promising, but the publisher hasn't submitted it, a reviewer can, or an editor with someone who's involved can um, try to nudge that along and get it to the review spotlight.
And I've also noticed that a good number of your books are set in small towns. Is there some sort of nostalgia to that around the holidays?
Not only that, but small town romances have been popular just in general. Just that's the one of the many trends within romance fiction. So they're just translating that and then adding a holiday setting to it. But yeah, I think it's somehow it might seem cozier in a small town. You know, it's a smaller group of people. You're more familiar with them. It seems like there's um, more of that Christmassy feeling or holiday feeling.
Hmm. Yeah, I was telling you about the Jackie Lau series I read. One of the characters was in a small town, but the three other characters were in Toronto, and it was really interesting because they talked about why they want to be in a big city versus the small town, why they one of their parents were mixed race, and they talked about their experience of racism in the schools, if they looked more like their Chinese parent versus their white parent. So it was really, really interesting, and very, I learned a lot. It was
Mhm.
amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if her books have been reviewed by, like a library journal or anything like
Traditional
that.
journal or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to say. Part of it is sometimes the author has to make an effort, or their publisher has to. One example that I know just from Booklist is we were one of the first people to review Courtney Milan when she was writing
Mhm.
for Harlequin. So now she's gone indie. Yeah, she's an amazing writer, but that was because certain people kind of said this author looks like she's going to be important to the genre. We need to kind of maybe focus on her.
Yeah, no, she's amazing. Sherry Thomas, so
Uh,
many. All right, let's go on to our next book.
Okay. The next one is an example of how sometimes as readers and reviewers, we tend to forget about the wonderful holiday romances available in category romances, published by Harlequin. They do a number of holiday romances. And actually, that's sometimes where you can find those holidays you don't see from bigger publishers. But the example I have is a historical. It's called Regency Reunions at Christmas by Diane Gaston, Laura Martin, and Helen Dixon. And these are all 19th century settings with romances that feature second chances. In the case of Diane Gaston, her novella is The Major's Christmas Return. The protagonist, Carolyn Demain, is penniless, so she eagerly accepts an offer from her friend to stay at her country home. But when Carolyn arrives there, she finds it's practically empty. There's like just a few servants. Everyone else is decamped because one of the guests, Major Guy Nashfield, everyone thinks may have typhoid. So Carolyn is left with these three young servants to nurse this guy back to health. And of course, in a typical twist, the man turns out to be the same man who jilted her at the altar 7 years ago. Yeah. And you just have to expect that. Laura Martin wrote a novella called A Proposal for a Penniless Lady. It's kind of the same setup. It features Isabel Partridge, who's been struggling to keep her family financially afloat. They've gone down in the world. Her father refuses to let her sell things to kind of keep things going, and she's at her wits' end. Thomas Williamson left their small village years ago, made a big name for himself in the city. Now he's back to visit his mother. The two happen to have been an item, I guess you'd say in Regency terms, years ago. Now they're back together. Can Isabel forgive Thomas for what he's done? Can he get her to can he convince her to accept him? Because if they get back together, it's basically the perfect solution financially and romantically for both of them.
Mm.
And the last novella is by Helen Dixon. It's called Her Duke Under the Mistletoe. Sophie had an arrangement with her husband, Tristan. She brought the money to the marriage. After 6 weeks, he would leave and go to Egypt and do his archaeology thing, and they would never meet again. That was their arrangement. She was perfectly happy with it. It's now 4 years later. Sophie is enjoying the holiday season with her friends when who should turn up but Tristan. He's come back to town, hoping to convince Sophie to give him and their marriage another chance. So it's just a wonderful collection of little novellas. What I love about novellas as a reader is that during the holiday, you're so rushed, you're so stressed, time is such a premium. If you can find a book that has novellas in it, you can read an author in one night. And it also lets you kind of experiment with new authors that you've never tried before. So it's a great in many ways.
I'm going to ask Kamachi's question in a second, but before I forget this, we talked about this a little bit earlier too, is that when I was, again, starting out as a reader, most holiday anthologies were historical fiction, historical romance. And most of them were part of a series, sort of like, hey, I have this whole series, read a little bit about it. Has that changed dramatically over the years, do you think?
Yeah, I think especially with Harlequin, they're doing more and more with contemporary holiday settings and stories. They're also kind of bringing in more diversity into their holidays storylines. You'll see that with the contemporary stories primarily. But yeah, I think they're able to do that because they have such a tremendous number of titles publishing each year, each month, that they can afford to experiment a little bit with things that a publisher like Random House, that might not have that many options. They have to be more cautious.
Yeah. I have to say that I didn't, you said that it's sort of like stress-free, it's a shorter novella. I didn't love it because I was like, oh, now I have to go read 18 other books because I love this story, this novella so much.
But that's, yeah, you're you're someone who we have in the bookstore and formerly in the libraries, who there's a series, you have to read every series, you have to read them in order. Whereas I'm like, okay, this is the book I have, I either like it or I don't. And
Nope.
that, yeah,
Can't
we're
do it.
opposite ends of the spectrum in that case.
Yes, and both have their, pros and cons, but I'm probably right now. I'm fine. No, I mean, I just don't understand how people can read things out of order because, characters walk in but I understand that sometimes you just want to read what you have in your hand and you're not bothered by it.
And I also think it's important as a reader, if an author can't sell you on the book that they have out currently, I'm not really interested in investing in 12 titles before that. That book should stand on its own, more or less.
Yeah. Well, am a huge fan of the JD Robb books, but she's on like 57 or something, somebody coming in right now would probably be like, oh my gosh, it's gonna take me an entire year. So,
Yeah,
but
I actually review those for book lists, so I kind of know what you're saying. Yeah. But I think you can, I mean, because I read like the first 10 and then there was a gap, and then I picked up at 26 or something like that. Each one does kind of stand on its own. You get a better, it's a richer experience if you're familiar with books before that, but it's an enjoyable experience if you're not, if it's just the first book you read.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I've read them all in order and I will continue to read them until she stops. Um, and she does have holiday ones, holiday novellas. So I really enjoy those. So Kamachi does ask, as a reviewer, you would have had read many holiday romances over the years of them all. Which one made it to the top of your list?
Gosh, that's a good question. My memory is so terrible that it just, I have to, I'd have to go back and look and see. If you're talking about the ones this year that I read, which was about 30 altogether, I would say Three Holidays and a Wedding was one of my favorites, just because I had no experience with the authors. I thought both of them did an excellent job. And I would go with Holly Jolly, am I getting it right?
Yeah.
Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy book. I thought both were excellent for what they did.
hmm When you started out being a reviewer, what kind of books did you lean towards?
They first sent me historicals because that was kind of my traditional Regencies and historical romance. And then I think once you establish yourself and show that you can read outside your comfort zone, the editors are willing to send other things. So I would get inspirational romances and romantic suspense and contemporary romances and paranormal, futuristic. I love Jane Ann Krenz Jane Castle, so
Mhm.
another area.
I read well, actually, I loved her historicals. Um, I can't remember which one it was, but it was like one about a spice merchant. Anyways, we don't have to go into it, but I do love her books, her writing. Okay, we have time for two more. I think you said you have two more, right? If I'm counting right.
I'll do two more, and they're not actually holiday romances per se, but they're romances that remind me about what the holiday should be, the spirit of them. So I'll throw that caveat out. The first is called The Beginning of Everything by Jackie Fraser. Um, Jess Cavendish is escaping from a bad relationship. She's basically left her partner with very little money and what she could stuff into a knapsack. And now she's trying to survive. This is set in Wales. She kind of moves from place to place. She stayed with friends who let her stay with her for a little bit of time. She's trying to find a job, but that's hard to do when you don't have a permanent residence and you can't establish yourself as a member of the community. So that's her setup when the book opens. She sees a house that's been sold recently and is undergoing renovations. And she thinks, well, that's the perfect place to just kind of camp out for a few days, collect herself, get herself back together. She's not really harming anyone. No one's in the home. It's That's at least her rationale. So she sets up camp in there, and things do go well for a few days. She finds a job in a restaurant washing dishes. She's got a safe place to go to. And then the owner shows up of the home. And the owner is Gethin Thomas, and he does something that surprises her. He's not mad at her. He doesn't kind of rat her out to the police. He doesn't do anything like that. He just says, I'm not moving in for several weeks, if not more. Why don't you stay here? You can help me by seeing that the repair people are let in and out, handling that, and it gives you some place to stay. And it's that one small act of kindness that changes the life of Jess and the people around her. And I think that for me is what really we should be looking for at the holiday season, is how can we make an impact in someone else's life. The other thing that really surprised me about it was how easy it is for almost any of us, just with one missed paycheck, to slip down the socioeconomic ladder and then end up homeless or without a place to live. It's not something that happens to just certain people. It can happen to anybody.
Right. That is true. And
Yeah.
people, especially feel it during the holidays, that anything that they feel during the year, it feels amplified during the holidays. Loneliness, homelessness, all of that is just more visible, I feel like. But I'm curious about one thing about what you just said about reading this book that sort of reminds you of what the holiday season should be like. And
Mhm.
the question really is about, some of us gallop through books. We just want to know what's going to happen. How do we pick up those nuggets as you do? Because you must read, so many books a year. How do you stop to pick up the important things in a book?
That's when you know the book is really good, when it's forcing you to stop and look at the writing. I mean, there's plenty of books that you read just for the story or for the characters, and that's fine. They're entertaining, and that's what the author sets out to do. But when you find yourself really sinking into the story and not looking at, oh, I've got 50 more pages to go or something like that, that's when you know the author is um, achieving that additional level of success. And in the case of this book, it's also a wonderfully sweet romance. I mean, the relationship develops between them. It's got a different setting, Wales, which you don't often see in romances. So there's a lot to recommend this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true for a lot of them. And as a reader, different readers take away different things from each book. So, we can all find something to like in almost anything we read.
Yeah,
So, okay, last book, and then we can talk a little for a couple minutes.
sure. My last book came out a little bit earlier this year, but I also think it embodies a holiday principle. It's called Oh, great, I'm not doing this right. So I can here. One Summer in Savannah by Tara Shelton Harris. It's been 8 years since Sarah Lancaster has been back to Savannah. It was 8 years ago that she was sexually assaulted by Daniel Weiler.
Mm.
Daniel's family was extremely influential and powerful, but Sarah pressed charges and Daniel was convicted. But she had to get out of Savannah because there just was no way to live in that town. Now Sarah has to come back home because her father's experiencing some health issues. She needs to be there to help him and his family. So she brings her young daughter, Alana, who happens to be 8 years old, back with her. And readers can do the math when you think about the 8 year gap. When Sarah gets back to town, she doesn't expect to really run into anybody she knew because Daniel's still in jail, but his twin brother Jacob has come back to town. Yeah, and they had a friendship. Jacob supported Sarah when she pressed charges against his brother. She totally believed him, but he's had issues with his family. You don't know where that relationship is going, but surprisingly, it returns to the friendship they once had and then something more for both of them. This was a tough book for some readers because they kept saying they could not see how a woman would be able to forgive, even become involved with someone whose family had done such a horrific thing to her. And I think that's the whole point of the story. The author was inspired by a real life incident, the 2015 shooting at a church in Charleston.
Mm.
where a gunman attacked a group of worshipers in a church and brutally killed many of them. He was brought to trial, and this is what always almost brings me to tears when I think about it is after the trial was over and the Charleston shooter was convicted, several members of the victims' families who were in the courtroom went across the courtroom to him and told him that they forgave him because that's what their faith had told them they had to do. So you think if somebody in that situation can forgive somebody, maybe it's possible for other people to do that too. But this book was really about forgiveness, about dealing with that issue in your life, about coming to terms with things. It's a powerful book. It's a quiet book, but it's powerful. It's a remarkable debut. The author happens to be a librarian, so I'll just throw that out. You know, you have to give credit where credit is due. It's not something I would ordinarily read, but I just was so impressed with how she handled the story. And I think if you really want to look at how you might incorporate forgiveness into your own life in the future, this kind of gives you a template.
Mhm. Wow.
Yeah,
So that really kind of brings us full circle, John, to the importance of romance to readers, not
yeah,
just because it is an escape, but it's also really a like a path for us to deal with very difficult things in a way that's really accessible. And I wonder if you have found that not just with this book, but other romance books in terms of when you're reviewing them or recommending them, if that really takes is that if that's a large part or a part of why you would recommend a book.
yes, I think you're very right. It can help readers process issues in a safe way, perhaps that they're not able to do so at that point in time in the real world. And I think it's important for romances to reflect reality to a great deal because there's many different life experiences and they don't always start with happily ever after and end with happily after. Sometimes there's some rocky moments in between. And I think it's also important to let people out there who don't know about the genre understand that romance fiction tackles some very important, some very heavy, weighty topics, but it does so within the context of a genre. And it does so that we get the happily ever after we want as readers, but we also become a little bit richer as readers because we've learned about things we may not have. And I'll just mention briefly one book that's coming in February that's a perfect example of it. I loved it so much. It's probably going to be on my best list for next year. It's called At First Spite by
Oh,
Olivia
yes.
Dade. Oh my God, it's so good, so funny, so witty, so brutally honest. And it also deals with someone who has clinical depression and what that can do to a person in their life. But it's all within the context of such an amazing romance. So
Mhm.
reserve
Yeah.
it now, order it for your libraries, order it for yourself. It's
Oh,
amazing.
we are totally with that one, all of her books, because they all have some really important lesson for us, I think. Her and she and Talia Hibbert are both my go-tos when I want to just like dive deep into difficulty and know I'm going to have a happy ending.
Yeah,
So thank you so much, John. This is amazing. I'm gonna put all of those books on my TBR if I haven't read them already. A lot of those authors are well known to me, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk about the books that you've enjoyed this year.
thank you. It's been a wonderful opportunity. I've loved learning from you about what you've enjoyed. And I've got a couple authors to add to my list. I don't need them, but I've added them.
That's what romance readers do. We just add them on, you know? We'll
Yeah,
get to them when we get to them. So, yeah, for everybody who's here, I'll send out a list of the books that John has recommended. And I hope that you have happy holiday reading and find many, many more at your local library or at a bookstore or at a little free library, wherever you get your books. Read.
thank you.
Anyways, John, have a wonderful night. Thank you so much.
You too. Happy holidays and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I hope we can do this again sometime.
I would love to.
Awesome. I'll be in touch. All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.